This next video is to explain from your Sirkin textbook again. This is a z-test for proportions. This information is taken from pages 253 and 254. While you turn to that, I'm going to read the definition of a z-test for proportions, which is stated in your book on page 253. A z-test designed to test whether the difference between proportions in a sample reflects the difference in the population. And to do that, we have a z formula. Z equals p subscript s minus p subscript p divided by the square root of p subscript p times q subscript p divided by n. What in the world are these letters? We're going to discuss about that, so you know what they are, what this represents. Okay, for in the book, it's stating there's a small community. There's 20% minorities. Well, 20%, the proportion of that is 0.20. Now we know what our p subscript p is. That's a p. The subscript p is for the population. Yes. Our small community is our population that we're comparing our sample to. So p subscript p equals the proportion minorities in the population. This equals 0.20 or 20%. Continue reading. There's a new school superintendent. She thinks that her faculty of 100 teachers, she's looking at 100 teachers. This is our sample size. The 100 is then the sample size, which is our n. Our n is 100. She's thinking these 100 teachers underrepresents the minorities since 15 teachers are minority. Hey, this is our sample. This is our p subscript s, our p for sample, s for sample. So, our p subscript s is the proportion of minorities in the sample. It equals 0.15 or 15%. We only have one more thing to figure out. Q subscript p. P. Population. Okay, this one is Q subscript p equals proportion of non-minorities in population. How do you figure that out? Well, we know how many minorities there are. The proportion is 0.20. Remember, a proportion is taken from 1. So we subtract 1 from the p of the population, which is Q subscript p equals 1 minus 0.20 equals 0.80. Now we have all the information we need to work our formula. We're going to go to our formula now. Okay? Z equals the proportion of minorities in the sample minus the proportion of minorities in the population, p subscript p, divided by the proportion of minorities in the population, the proportion of non-minorities in the population, divided by our sample size, which we know is 100 teachers. Okay, so we plug the numbers in. The p subscript s, the sample, is 0.15. We know from over here. Subtract that from our population, our p subscript p, proportion of minorities in the population, which is 0.20, and all that's divided by the proportion of minorities in the population, which that's even up there, besides being over here on the left, is 0.20. You multiply that by the non-minorities, which is 0.80. And then you divide that by n, our sample size. We're looking at 100 teachers. Our n is 100. So now we show all of our math so the professor knows, that way if we mess up with a mathematical error, they know that we understand the concept of it. So z equals negative 0.05, because first we subtract up there, and we also multiply on the bottom. 0.20 times 0.80 equals 0.16 divided by 100. Now we go on to the next part. We got to take care of this division part here. 0.16 divided by 100 equals 0.0016. Now we got to give go to the square root sign. We got to take care of the square root sign. What two numbers multiplied by each other equals 0.0016? That's 0.04. Now we have division. Negative 0.05 divided by 0.04 equals negative 1.25. Okay, the z critical at the 0.05 level equals 1.65. Now, they didn't show it out further in the book, maybe because their number is so little here, it's a 1.25, but I like to take it out to the thousands place always. They only have it to the hundreds place. I like to take it to the 1.658, because if the number is bigger, like let's say if it's a 1.657 or 1.659, it makes a difference as far as if our z is higher or lower than that, as far as rejecting the null hypothesis or not. So now let's go back to our z of 1.25 is less than a 1.65. Thus, we cannot reject the null hypothesis. That's in quotes from page 254 of your textbook. Thus, we cannot conclude that minorities are underrepresented among the teachers. That's on page 254. So what they're basically saying, because of this, because of our z in the critical, that even though we're looking at this, we see 15% and 20%, really, they're not underrepresented, the minorities, the amount of minorities that are the staff, the faculty, the teachers, at this new superintendent school compared to that of the population. But it's good she checked this out just to see how everything's looking, and it's good she ran herself a z and compared the two together, the population, the sample, and the proportion of minorities in the sample compared to the proportion of minorities in the population. Proportion population, P and P, and the P and S for proportion minorities in a sample. So this is basically your Sirkin, a z-test for proportions.